Welcome to Conversations Different from the Santa Fe New Mexican. This is Inez Russell Gomez, and today we are talking to Amy Miller of the May Learning Center. And with this conversation, we hope to find out what they do, how they help the community, and what you parents can do to help your own children. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks for having me, Inez.
I really appreciate you taking time. As we tape this, everyone's getting ready to go back to school. And I know that at the May Center, you're probably got a lot of things going on right now.
We do. We're getting ready to start, as so many people are. We're also moving to a new campus this weekend. Saturday's our official move date. So, yeah, it's a busy
That's
time, but I'm thrilled to be here.
good. So where will you guys be located once you make the move?
We're moving to 32 Puesta del Sol, which is half of the old Waldorf campus. So the
Okay.
new charter school is taking over half of the campus, and we're taking over 5 acres plus the high school building. So it's a great location, and we're really excited to have our own home.
That's nice. And does that gonna let you expand a little bit or take more pupils, all that kind of stuff?
It will, yeah. So we have a multi-phased plan for expansion. So the first phase was just to get us over there to the property. The current school building is large enough to house our current operations, but then we'll be building a new building on the grounds that will let us double our current student enrollment, and then also allow us to have teacher facilities for teacher learning. So basically, adult learning facilities for our Teacher Institute, which is a large portion of what we do.
Oh, nice. So what you do is help people the way the website phrases it is with learning differences. So talk about what your mission is and how long you've been around.
Sure. Yeah. So I was a middle and high school English teacher for a long time in my previous iteration of educational career. And I always felt like every year I would have kids in my class who I knew were really bright. Sometimes they were the kids who contributed the most meaningful things to our class discussions. But then when I would see their papers, I would have this moment where there was a discrepancy between what I knew was my experience with that person and then what I actually saw from their writing. Um, and so I didn't know what to do about that. Like, I had gone to a teacher prep program. I had had one class about all kind of exceptionalities, and then like 1 hour of that class was devoted to learning disabilities. And so I left there really thinking, like, I'm never going to teach these kids. These kids are going to be in special education. I won't need to know about this. And what I found out was that every year I had several of them in my class. A lot of them were not identified as having a learning disability, but I just knew that there was something different about the way they learned, and I didn't know what to do about it. Anyway, so fast forward, I was working at Desert Academy here about, over 15 years ago. And I had the opportunity to go to the Shelton School in Dallas for some training. And Shelton is the largest school for kids with learning differences in the world. So there's over 1,000 kids enrolled there. And when I went, it was one of those like light bulb moments for me, in that, first of all, what I saw about their model was, in my mind, not just good for kids who learn differently, but I really felt like it was good for all kids, because it was an individualized approach where the kids were in a community, they were learning together, they were engaged together, but teachers were also really looking at who each child is, what are their strengths, what are the things that are more difficult for them, and how do we diagnostically teach in a way that serves that whole person. And so I kept going back to Shelton to just like do more and more trainings. And eventually I said to Dr. Joyce Pickering, who had been my mentor and the head of school there for decades, I really wish New Mexico had a school like this, because it wasn't just Santa Fe. We just really didn't have anything in the whole
Anywhere in the state.
state. Yeah.
Yeah.
So after me kind of whining about it for a while, she encouraged me to start something. So we started May Center 13 years ago. My co-founder is Karen Lindeen, who's the principal at Wood Gormley now.
Okay.
And when we started May Center, we just sort of envisioned it initially as a tutoring center where we would support primarily kids with dyslexia
Okay.
through a language therapy program. And what we know about kids with dyslexia and related differences is that typically they're kids who are high IQ. A lot of people with dyslexia actually have a very high IQ, but who struggle with reading and writing. And so in a traditional classroom setting, these are people who don't present nearly as intelligent as they actually are, because most of the ways that we measure intelligence in a typical school are through reading and writing.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so we started just sort of providing that remediation support for kids who had dyslexia and similar things. But then, like, the more that I learned about what it means to learn differently, the more I realized, first of all, people who learn differently need not only to have remediation for the stuff that's hard for them, but they also have to be recognized and celebrated for what they're good at.
Okay.
And they're good at lots of things, but in a
Right.
typical school, they're not usually identified that way, right? They're
Right.
usually kids who consider themselves not to be good in school.
That makes
So,
sense. So
yeah,
go back to, what does learning differently mean? So
yeah, yeah,
dyslexia, we understand because it's the letters and
yeah,
everything. But
yeah,
what are some of the other things? I know some people learn better, not by listening, but by actually concretely doing. Is
yeah.
it those sorts of things?
So, yeah, the literal definition of a learning difference is it's a processing difference in the brain
Okay.
that affects one or more of the forms of basically language and communication. So, this can take many, many different forms, right? It could be dyslexia as an example of that. Dyslexia is at the heart a difference in the way the brain processes the sounds of the language and then understands how to map those sounds onto the symbols on the page. So, like, onto the letters, right?
Okay. Okay.
Um, but there are other kinds of learning differences too. So if somebody has a slower than average processing speed, what that means is that they take longer to kind of process information in their brain before they can do something with it. And
Okay.
so we have kids at our school who that's their primary thing. So for them, they might have a really high IQ, but it just might take them longer than their typical age level peers.
Okay.
So in a typical classroom, these are kids who the pace of the classroom is going so fast, or like when teachers are only calling on kids who are raising their hands all the time. These are kids who are still thinking about what the teacher's asking, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
by the time they get their response, it might be the best response in the class in terms of, the substance, but usually the conversation's already moved
Right.
on.
They get left behind.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
then others might have a difference, like in related to perception that shows up in math. So there's a learning difference called dyscalculia. And that basically is, I think I've self diagnosed myself with this. It's basically a problem with the concepts of math. So, like, um, I used to just memorize every single procedure in math because for me, memorizing the language made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
didn't really have a concept in my head of what it was. So, like fractions, I wasn't really picturing like a circle or a pie and then, like, a certain area shaded in when I would see a fraction. I would
Okay.
just be like, okay, I know I'm supposed to do X, Y, and Z to get the right answer. So that's an example of a perceptual difference in the brain, but it shows up in math.
So you can do the work, but you don't actually understand anything you're doing in a way.
Exactly, exactly,
Yeah.
yes. And then, other kids, like, we see a lot of kids who have attentional issues.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's an imbalance of the neurotransmitters, and we call that ADHD. Sometimes, though, that can be for other reasons, and so the idea of learning differences, I think, for me, is broader than just disabilities because, like, for example, we've seen a real rise in kids who've experienced trauma.
Right,
And
right.
so for those children, whether it's a discrete traumatic event or whether it's ongoing trauma, their brain is shut down. The front part of their brain is shut down to protect themselves. And
Okay.
so when that happens, they look like a kid who has ADHD. They look like a child who's having difficulty with attention, who can't remember or retain information. But really, the core of that is the trauma response. But
Okay.
the practices that we use to try to support people who are needing to learn in a different way are going to work for those kids as well. Of course, they also need emotional support and other things. But so
Right.
it's kind of this broad category that just indicates these are smart people with high potential, but in a typical classroom setting, they're not always reaching that potential because the way that their brain is not learns is not really being maximized, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. So you start as a tutoring resource and then you decide that you need to have a school. And so how old is your school?
Our school's been around 12 years, so we were only
Okay.
purely
One
tutoring
year.
for 1 year, and then we went right into the school because we had a lot of families who wanted it. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. And we'll take a quick break and be back in a moment with more Conversations Different.
We make renewable doable. We're positive energy solar for a cleaner, brighter future for all. Positive energy's the right call. Feel good about your energy bill. Help save the planet too. Your trusted solar company, working hard for you. Generate positive energy. Positive energy solar.
We're back with Conversations Different and Amy Miller talking about the May Center for Learning. So, how big is the school now? So, how big are you?
We're small. We have about 50 kids in our school right now, pre-K through 8th grade. The kids are in very small class sizes, so average of about 6 to 7 kids per classroom. And that's purposeful. We really find that the kind of individualized instruction that we do works better in a smaller classroom. And the kids we work with oftentimes do better with a little less stimulation in the classroom. So that helps us kind of keep things a little more contained.
That makes sense. And that's actually one of the big debates in education is whether smaller class sizes matter. And teachers say, yes, they do. And the people who are paying for everything say, well, the research doesn't show. But it's one of those things that if you listen to the experience, you might want to go smaller so you can focus on each child more.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it what the model that we use basically flips the idea that, when I was a teacher for many years, I kind of performed one lesson in the front of the room and kids got it or they didn't. I would try my best to get around to each student in my class and, answer their questions, but I was really teaching one lesson. And so the model that we use, which really requires the small class size, is it's my job as the teacher to really know everything I can about this student. So we use assessment, but we also use observation and lots of other more informal measurements. And then decide what is going to, what does this child need to learn? Where do I meet them? And then how do I ensure that they're moving forward? So, it's a different model of teaching. It's not for everyone. I find it to be the most rewarding kind of teaching that I've ever done. But it does require that low student teacher ratio to really do it well, I think.
Yeah. It seems like there's a lot more. There's always a lot of work in teaching on the back end, but this requires a couple of other layers, it sounds like, in
Yeah.
terms of really knowing your student inside and out.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. It
Yeah.
does. Yeah.
That's interesting. So, what are you finding after these children finish 8th grade? Where do they go to high school?
Yeah, well, we're really proud that they go to every school in Santa Fe and beyond.
Nice.
We have a number of kids who are very successful at Santa Fe Prep. We have kids who've gone to Santa Fe High, to almost all of the charter schools in town. Quite a few kids who've gone to New Mexico School for the Arts, because oftentimes people who learn differently have some real strengths in the arts. And so we find that that's an area where a lot of our students anyway, really shine. So yeah, a wide range of schools. And we're proud of the fact that one of the pieces of feedback we often get is that our kids have actually better writing skills than kids who come
Nice.
from some other schools in town, which feels really good because these are kids that writing's hard for. But we stress it and we practice it quite a bit when they're with
Nice.
us.
Nice. So they learn to communicate and to function in other atmospheres. So that's real,
Yeah.
and that's part of the world is we have to function.
Absolutely, and that's our
Yeah.
goal. We do have a different kind of environment, but our goal is really to prepare kids to be in any environment that they choose to be. And part of that is teaching the kids how to advocate for themselves, to really know, first of all, how they learn best, what do they need to be successful, and then how to ask for that, which, is even for adults, sometimes a hard thing to do. So we actually practice those skills with the kids.
Oh, that sounds a lot of fun. How do you guys recruit students? Is it word of mouth or do people just know you're there? How does that work?
Yeah, sure. Number of different ways. I would say the number one way is parents talking to parents. If a school has worked well, if our school has worked well for a family, oftentimes other families hear about that. We do also get referrals from doctors' offices. We get referrals from other support people like educational diagnosticians or speech therapists, occupational therapists. We get referrals from other schools. There might be another school where a child's enrolled that might not be the right fit. And that school might actually say, hey, you guys check out May Center, see what you think. So a number of different ways.
There's Do you still have the tutoring, part of it for people who may be at a regular public school, but still need help, let's say, with reading or writing or any
Sure,
yeah,
yeah. Currently, no. So a few
okay.
years ago, we made the decision to stop the tutoring program, really to focus in on what we consider to be more of our high impact programs, which are our summer programs. We have two summer programs, one here in Santa Fe and one in Albuquerque. And then our Teacher Institute, which allows us to work with teachers across the state actually, and then that allows them to impact more kids, right? So we're a small organization. We're always kind of looking for what's our ultimate sort of lever points for the best impact. So we're looking at which of our programs are most successful, and then also how can we start to have a ripple effect in our state to improve education statewide.
Right, that makes sense. And that's really, the bottom line in New Mexico is that all the different things that have been tried over the years haven't seemed to budge. And I sometimes wonder if the way we're measuring education just doesn't work for the people
Mhm.
who live here for some reason or the other. Like
Mhm.
I grew up going to North Public in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and the kids I went to school with all have had really successful educational lives. But I don't know if we would have done well on a standardized test. So
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
yeah, you sort of just wonder because you don't want to make excuses and say, yeah, we don't, really we're great, but are we measuring it the right way? And do we have skills that we're not catching?
I think I'll tell you something that we're not measuring well and that's hard to measure.
Mhm.
And that is kind of what in education the lingo is, we call it executive function skills. Really what that refers to is self-regulation skills. So it's basically the skills we need to kind of pursue any goal in life. So whether that's, doing well on a test, whether that's, something like what career I want to have someday, or just getting out of the bed in the morning and getting to work on or school on time, right? Yeah, totally. These are all goal directed actions. And so I think that like one of the things that I am very interested in as an educator and that we work on a lot at May Center is like how do we create an environment that really fosters those skills in people? Because to me, I mean, of course, learning to read, learning to write, learning math, these are all important skills. But above and beyond that, being able to self-regulate both emotionally, behaviorally, organizationally, be organized in my life, pay my bills on time, all that, meet deadlines, all that kind of stuff, I think are super, super important skills. And I don't think we're measuring them at all. So I think it's really hard to know what if we're doing a good job in that area or not.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. I guess back in the day when you took a class like home economics, that taught you a lot of life skills, or they even used to have life skills classes, and
Yeah.
it was things like balancing your checkbook and how to
Yes.
pay bills, and some of that you hopefully learn at home. But I think as people are so busy, maybe you're not getting those skills at home, so you're graduating and you might be able to read, but you're not going to be able to stay in your apartment because you're going to forget to pay the rent or something.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So it sounds like you guys are looking at the whole person.
Absolutely. I mean, that's, I think, what good education does, no matter what particular philosophy a person subscribes to. I think above and
Mhm.
beyond it, there's an obligation to really see the whole person, to, what I am interested in as an educator. And I hope what May Center does, at least it is our goal, is to really help each student feel seen, develop meaningful relationships with their teacher and their peers, and then understand how to collaborate and communicate in the world. And so we try to frame that all for the kids as like when you become a better reader, a better writer, a better speaker, a better listener, right? All of these things, a better at, organizing your life. These are all ways in which then you're able to be more effective in your communication with others and being a part of a community.
Yeah.
So kids want that, they want people to see them for who they are. They want to
Yep.
have authentic relationships. And I think those things lead to a better community. I think when we look at the national level right now and some of the dysfunction we're seeing on every level, it's because people have kind of forgotten those basic communication, collaboration, how to see things from other people's points of view. These are all important skills.
No, and there's a lot of research that shows that people who get along with other people, even if they're not as smart or maybe not as talented, will go farther in life because they have the
That's it.
skill, because they can function in a group and can, bring people along with them.
Agreed. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
totally agree.
Yeah, that's good. We'll take a quick break and be back with more Conversations Different.
This is Patrick Dorsey, publisher of the Santa Fe New Mexican. Looking to reach a wider audience and grow your business? For 175 years, the Santa Fe New Mexican has been the trusted voice of Santa Fe, with unmatched local reach in print and online. In addition to our long-standing, independent, family-owned newspaper, we have a full-fledged marketing team with the expertise to help you succeed in the 21st century. From traditional print to precision-targeted digital advertising, we have the tools to connect you with your ideal customers. Partner with us and see the results for yourself. Advertise with the Santa Fe New Mexican and unlock your business's full potential. Visit us at santafenewmexican.com/advertising or call us at 505-995-3852. Thank you.
We're back with Conversations Different, talking to Amy Miller about the May Center. Let's talk just a little bit about what teachers do when they go there. So you have a Teachers Institute,
Sure.
and I assume it's helping teachers learn to teach better to all the kinds of students they have.
Yeah, we do a number of different things. One thing that we offer twice a year is a national certification program in dyslexia intervention. And so we're one of the only programs in the state that offers this. And it's pretty intensive. Participants take a 56-hour initial Zoom-based course. So we have people participate from all over the state. We just had a cohort over the summer with 26 people in it. From everywhere from Gadsden to the Navajo Nation, all around, which is pretty cool for us to be able to connect like that. And then they have a practicum year where they're teaching the program, and we're doing observation and feedback. And then eventually they earn their national certification. So it's basically a reading specialist credential that they earn. Then we have other programs where we work specifically with districts. So in Roswell, I work with 7 elementaries where I interface primarily at first with the principals. So it's really kind of a coaching for the principals around how to structure your classroom to best support these kinds of literacy skills, reading, writing, communication skills across the board. And then how to coach the teachers to be more effective in their practice. So we do that. For a number of years, we've worked in Poake at Pablo Roybal Elementary, where we trained all of the teachers in our dyslexia therapy program. And then we provided intensive coaching with those teachers while they're actually teaching. And what ends up happening often is that we'll start maybe by teaching them, how to deliver a particular literacy program. But then what we find is almost always we move to this wider context of how to help kids with self-regulation. Because what ends up happening is if I want to pull 3 kids to my table and do a little small group stuff with them, and I've got 20 some kids in the class,
right?
If those kids can't be self-managed for a few minutes, right, and work independently on a meaningful
You can't
task,
do the small group.
right, you can't do it. So, and that's where teachers get frustrated. Like that's, I think, one of the reasons we see so much teacher turnover or teachers leaving the profession is that they don't feel like they really have the support and understanding education that they need to be effective with that big class and figure out how to serve everybody's needs. So
Right.
we do a lot
And
of that work.
and that's where having a smaller class would help, because having 10 kids to go off by themselves while you work with 3 is just gonna be easier to manage than 15 or 20 or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of our challenges is to kind of take the model that we use at May Center and
Uh-huh.
figure out how to scale it for a larger classroom with all of the difficulties, the challenges
Mm.
that do arise from a larger classroom. So that's been an interesting puzzle, but I feel like we have had some success for sure.
And I believe the Poake district did some really good reading gains, so
They
they've been doing
did.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. A couple years ago, they had the highest gains in the state. So we were proud of that.
Yeah, that's important. Now, obviously learning starts at home. So what can parents do to help their kids get the best start, and also how to spot when maybe they're not necessarily clicking in the
Sure.
classroom?
Sure, great question. So, when we think about it with young children, we use the acronym CLAP to kind of think about the different areas that parents should pay attention to. So, the C in CLAP stands for coordination. So, that would be, is this child meeting their fine and gross motor milestones? Because what we know about the brain, let me see if I can say this without going off on a blah, blah, blah. Basically, if a child, for instance, doesn't crawl, there are parts of that child's brain, the cerebellum, crossing the midline, et cetera, that aren't really coming online if they're not crawling. So when we see that, that's our first little flag that those parts of the brain might also not come online for things like learning to read or having attention control or other things like that. But what we see is when those kids get occupational therapy at a young age or physical therapy at a young age, then they do better over the long run. So
Start the physical stuff, and that gets the mental stuff going.
that's exactly right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all connected in there.
That
So that's
makes
the first
sense.
one. Language is the L. So we look at, is a child developing language at a pace that's typical with their peers? Sometimes that can be really obvious, like the child isn't talking and their
Right.
peers are.
Right.
But sometimes it can be much more subtle, and especially with dyslexic kids, it's much more subtle. These are kids who are often very verbal and have a high vocabulary, but they mispronounce words.
Oh,
So we
interesting.
look for, are they articulating all of those sounds correctly?
Hmm.
What we know is when we catch that early and that child goes to speech therapy and gets those sounds corrected, that translates directly to their ability to read accurately and spell accurately.
Okay. Okay.
And then A is attention. So,
Okay.
can this child attend to a task for a reasonable period of time for their age, right? We're not talking about asking somebody to sit down and read Anna Karenina when they're 4 years old, right? But can they sit down and eat a meal with their family? Can they, engage with a puzzle or blocks, right, for a period of time?
Right. Right.
Also, something else to look at in that same regard is, does this child hyper focus on things?
Right.
Because
You
hyper
can't get
focus,
them off, because that's another yeah, yeah,
it
yeah.
is. That's
Yes.
that's an equal issue that shows us that they might have some difficulty with attention modulation.
Okay.
And then the last one is the P, and that stands for perception. And so, in that regard, we're looking at, can kids identify things like larger and smaller, things that are, taller or shorter? Can they negotiate a space? Directionality is a big one for a lot of kids. Can they learn their left from their right? Can they leave the room and turn the right direction, or do they always turn the other direction?
Right.
Things like that. So their body in space is kind of what we look at for the P.
Okay.
So when parents are thinking about those things, they can think about clusters. Like, we all have some things that are our strengths and weaknesses. That's just
Right.
normal.
Yeah.
But if they start to see a cluster, oh yeah, they have this, 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 then I always recommend, it's better to have an evaluation so you have a sense of who your child is, not
Okay.
to limit them with a label, which I think a lot of us out of my generation and older, we all sort of were wary of labels because we thought they were limiting to people. And I
Yes.
totally get that. Now I think what we're really trying to understand and see is that when we understand how somebody's brain processes, we can teach them the way they learn best. And so
That's
they don't have to experience all of that feeling unsuccessful, which impacts their self-worth and their self-esteem so dramatically. And when that happens, it's much harder to help somebody get back on track because now they have all these negative beliefs about themselves, right? That aren't true, that are completely
Right.
false. But if they haven't experienced success, then that's the evidence, right? Well, that kid's doing it over there and I'm not, so I must be dumb and they must be smart. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
story they tell themselves. So the sooner that we help to support individuals who learn differently, they can see, oh, I am really smart. I have all these things I'm good at. And these are the things that are hard for me, but I can get better at them.
Yeah,
And that's
that
really
makes sense.
cool.
It gives them the tools to succeed is what you're talking about.
Exactly.
And
Correct.
they're coming from a sense of understanding. That's so important. What happens to an adult who maybe didn't get the assessments that they needed or the help they needed, and all of a sudden they're in college even, and they can't figure out why it's not quite clicking because maybe
Yeah.
the work's harder or whatever. Do you go back and take tests then and start, trying to understand yourself at that level?
Yeah, it is never too late. And I've met so many adults who are very successful, but who were not identified as having a learning difference until they were adults. And one of them is Mayor Tim Keller. He has spoken at, for our events a number of times. And he was identified with dyslexia when he was at Harvard Business School, getting a master's degree. And he actually was identified much earlier, but his parents never spoke of it, so nobody knew. And because they didn't want him to feel different, which is often what happens. But he got to he's very smart, so he got all the way through. He never really read a book. He had all these coping strategies. He got to Harvard and he was failing because it was really hard. And so he ended up from a friend, he's telling a friend about it. And the friend was like, have you ever been tested for dyslexia? So he actually was evaluated while he was at Harvard and diagnosed and went through language therapy.
Wow.
So I appreciate him being willing to share that story because it really does drive home the point. A, it has nothing to do with intelligence. And B, it is never too late. And you can get support, which is important not only for your success in life, but also, again, for your own self-concept and your
Yeah.
own the way that you see yourself in the world. I think that's the
Yeah.
most important.
No, because if we feel successful, then we feel good about ourselves, and that just leads to this nice circle of happiness, kind of. I know watching my own kid learn, it was really interesting when he came home and told me that the smart girls in class read chapter books.
Yep.
And I was like, "Well, you read chapter books?" And he's like, "No, I don't." And I was
Mhm.
like, "Honey, Cowboy Sam." And he goes, "Well, yeah, I've read Cowboy Sam." And I said, "Well, in one chapter, he kills the snake. In one chapter, he catches the black pony." And he's like, "Those are chapters?" And I was like, "Yes." And he was so happy that he
Mhm.
wasn't behind everybody and that those were just a different kind of chapters. And it's just amazing how fragile kids can be when they're
Yes.
starting, you
Yes,
know?
it is, and how perceptive they are. When I talk to a parent and they'll say, "Well, I'm just hesitant to get my child evaluated because I don't want them to feel different." I usually say, "Well, they already do feel different.
Yeah,
They're smart, they're perceptive, they're looking around every day at school, and they notice these differences." So it's not you're not protecting them, you're just keeping them from having more understanding and information.
that's right. And we need information to be our best selves. And
Exactly.
that's what you're offering at the May Center.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good. And on that note, this has been another Conversations Different. We'll be back next week. Thank you for listening to Conversations Different, hosted by me, Inez Russell Gomez, editorial page editor for the Santa Fe New Mexican. Our weekly episodes would not be possible without your support. We hope you enjoy them and keep listening. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Consider signing up for our newsletter so you never miss an episode, and while you're at it, consider subscribing to the Santa Fe New Mexican. Our podcast is available by visiting our website, santafenewmexican.com/podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Conversations Different with Inez Russell Gomez is produced by Matt Dalside and Ernesto Cisneros, published by the Santa Fe New Mexican, a local and independent newspaper owned by Robin Martin.